I wanted to go ahead and read part 2 of the essay that I started from this book called Hegel the Infinite, which is edited by Zizek. And the essay that I am reading is called The Perversity of the Absolute, the Perverse Core of Hegel and the Possibility of Radical Theology. And this is by John D. Caputo. And this is a really beautiful essay. And so I read the first half of it in another video. So I'm going to go ahead and finish it for you. And you'll have to forgive me. I'm getting over a cold, so I might sound a little snottier than usual. But anyways, so I left off at a quote from Zizek, so I'll go ahead and pick up again. By claiming that the spirit is a virtual entity, and by recognizing the impotence of God as an actual entity, Zizek comes very close to the view I am here advancing and have advanced in the weakness of God, one of Caputo's previous books, but with one important difference. Zizek's view of spirituality is too much turned to the subject and its belief systems and not enough turned to the event itself. The virtuality of the event is expressed in subjective beliefs even as it is actualized in things, but it is not reducible to subjective beliefs. Subjective beliefs arise in response to events, give words to events, and are translated into deeds and institutions by believing subjects. They are responses to the events that precede them, not simply sustained in the thin air of subjectivity itself by the subject's ability to suspend its disbelief in a fictive as if. To put my concern in Hegelian terms, we might say that Zizek fails to do justice to the claims of the virtualities of substance, for the event is no less instantiated in things or substance than it is expressed by the names that galvanize the beliefs of the subject. From Hegel's point of view, Zizek's view of virtuality is one-sided. The name of God or of the Spirit of God arises as a response to events. It gives words to powers that overtake the subject, that lay claim to it. If the Spirit is the name of a subjective presupposition, that is only because it is first of all the name of something that prepossesses the subject and calls it forth. Something by which the subject is constituted in the first place. The virtuality of the event is felt in both the beliefs of subjects and the energies of things, and it shows up in both names and things. The virtual includes not only what is named by our names, but what is worlding in the world. The thinging of the thing in Heidegger's play on Bedingung. The virtual is both substance and subject, realized in things and named by subjects. But to be more precise or more perverse, the perverse core of Hegel is to conceive a world in which the absolute would be neither substance nor subject, or in which substance and subject would only be provisional nominal effects, stand-ins for more nameless and boundless virtualities, for virtualities still unnamed. By the same token, history would be a radically immanent movement without the steadying hand of teleology at its wheel. That is what it means to say there is no big other. Hegel relocated the absolute, but he himself left its classical attributes in place. But what if, and this is the perversity of Hegel, history is really history, really has the teeth and inventiveness of history, only as a radically atelic contingent process, where its outcome or resultat is radically unforeseeable, where there is no one identifiable and overarching result, but only so many fortuitous effects. What if instead of a teleological movement, history is marked by the vagaries of change, the fortuitousness of little graces, and fortunes variously good or bad? What if events are not contained by a telos guaranteeing their direction and good outcome? What if the event is but a promise that provokes us and stirs our heart, or a memory of the dead that haunts us? What if instead of teleology, there is only, or at most, the promise still unkept lodged in events still unsaid? What if substance and subjects are nothing more than a certain shorthand we have devised for the play of events? What if, instead of the absolute steering all, we are thrown back on ourselves, made radically responsible for responding to the address that comes to us from events? If it is events that call, it is we who are made responsible. Hegel argued that nothing in the realm of ideas or of the concept or meaning, nothing even about God himself, can be a real and effective actuality unless it becomes what it is in space and time. But the becoming effective of the absolute is our responsibility, just as Paul said that it is we who are expected to fill up what is lacking in the body of Christ. And that's from Colossians chapter 1, verse 24. What if the absolute were not a matter of logos at all, of a wisdom and a power that steers things wisely and well to their appointed telos, but a kind of alogical sense that we can call the intensity of existence? What if the force that is harbored by the word divine is not providence or omniscience, but excitation, exaltation, rejoicing in the moments when the flow is intensified, concentrated, when it shines bright with the splendor of becoming, when it resonates with the clamor of becoming? What if existence were a matter of awakening to the flow within, sensitizing ourselves to its impulses, rejoicing in its joys, suffering with its sorrows? What if the absolute is found not in treating all suffering as for the better, as belonging to a deeper divine calculation and foreknowledge that sees it all to a happy conclusion? What if instead suffering were a sigh from the depths of becoming, the intensity of a divine sigh, a divine lamentation that asks everything of us, that demands our response, our redress? What if it is the divine becoming itself that suffers and that asks not to be abandoned? The perversitile result would be not that it is God who brings relief, but that it is we who are asked to relieve the suffering of God, to answer the divine lamentation, to hold out a hand to those who are laid low by the shifting tides of becoming. Oh my gosh. What if the name of God is not the name of the telos, logos, namas, that hover protectively over becoming, but of events astir within becoming itself that leave their trace in the absolute intensities of becoming? Life is not justified because there is some divine watchman overseeing it from afar in a distant heaven, nor even as in Hegel himself, when this watchman or logos is restationed within becoming itself. Life is justified by life itself. If you ask life, why do you live? Meister Eckhart said, it would answer, I live because I live. Life is justified by the intensities of life, by movements of intense joy or compassion, by movements of authentic intensity, by the intensity of the most quotidian events, by even events both sacred and holy, by the event of intensity, which is life itself. Then everything is redeemed, which is not to say that it was ever fallen or lost, by being made into an affirmation, even though we suffer daily from a sea of troubles and outrageous fortune. The world is not fallen, but the world is a challenge, a task. The world is not lost, but it is risky business. Events are not philosophical objects that suffer from the lack of a philosophical logos that works like a rule to stabilize them or a key to unlock their secret, even as life is not a game in which we are asked to guess the secret word. Life is an incomparable and unencompassable flow in which we are swept up that offers us the occasional chance of intermittent grace, the passing opening of momentary glory, moments that give life its passion, its intensity. It is not a matter of the rationalization or the justification of events, but of their intensification, not of finding the logos of becoming, but of undoing its pathos, its passion, the passion of existence. Life is a flow by which we are carried, and the passion of life is the passion of the flow. Our passion is to awaken to and feel life's pulse. Our task is to let life pass through our bodies so that we tremble with joy, even as it is no less our task to reach out to those whom life has laid low. We are called upon to let the sparks of becoming fly up in all their unpredictable and immeasurable chance, to let the dance of becoming, the grace of life flow freely, without turning into a pre-existent and autonomous force of which individuals are merely bearers. That is exactly why Levinas thought that Bergson is a pantheist. It is still true that life passes through our bodies and our minds, our hearts and souls, with all the force of a windswept beach, with all the lightness and grace of a gentle breeze. Hegel labored under the classical metaphysical assumption that becoming is a process to be interpreted, not a process to be intensified, magnified, and made more elastic and electric. By reinscribing God in the world, Hegel sent theology down a radical path. But the perverse core of Hegel is that by saying that the absolute is the substance and the subject of the world, Hegel opened the door to seeing God as the body and the soul of the world. To say the world is made in the image of God means the world is God's body or flesh. From the standpoint of religion, the terms are different in art or philosophy. The world beats with the heart of God, pulsates under a divine impulse, breathes with God's breath. What Marx said of religion, that it is the heart of a heartless world, he might better have said that of God. The ecstasies of joy and sorrow are the sighing and heaving of God. The lamentation of the wretched, the shouts of exaltation, what the Catholic Rosary calls the joyful, sorrowful, and glorious mysteries, are the groaning of the Spirit, exclamations of the divine impulse with which things tremble. Oh my gosh. What then of human responsibility? By this redescription of God, Hegel prepared the way for the insight that just as God is not a being that steers things from above, neither is God some immanent guiding force situated here below. Rather, God is the name of events that call upon us to complete what is missing in the body of God, to rush to the aid of God's suffering flesh, to rejoice in the joy that surges through God's limbs, to sanctify what is holy and what is sacred, to remedy the divine travail, to bring relief wherever his lamentations can be heard. The upshot of Hegel's revolutionary paradigm shift is not that we become instruments of the cunning of reason, but that we become responsible. Extending Benjamin's perversitile interpretation of the Messiah, we are prepared to say that we are the ones whom God has been waiting for. Oh my gosh. We are not waiting for God or Godot, but God has been waiting for us. The weakness of God goes hand in hand with the responsibility of humankind. The name of God is the name of the beating of the world's heart, of the event that simmers in what happens. And we are asked to respond to it, to preserve the sacredness of earth and sky, to honor the holiness of the face. For the absolute is both the sacredness of the substance and the sanctity of the subject, both the face of the mountain and the flesh of the face. The heart of the absolute, by which I mean the events that stir restlessly with things, beats in both, chiasmically. For the mountain is both flesh and face, and the face is both invisible and visible incarnation, vulnerability and materiality. All things are chiasmically substance and subject, both sacred and holy, and we are asked to be both poets of the sacred and prophets of the holy, no less than prophets of the sacred and poets of the holy. The perverse core of what religion calls salvation lies here, for it is not God who saves us, but we who are asked to save God, to save the name of God, to save the event that stirs in the name of God. We are asked to make ourselves worthy of what happens to us, where God is what happens to us. The incarnation means that we are asked to assist at his birth in the world, to let the event happen, and thereby to save God, to save the event that stirs in the name of God. We are called upon to let the event happen in us, through us, to let the flow of events, the absolute becoming of the flow, pass through our bodies and pass into the world. By virtue of the virtuality of the event, we are called to assist in the realization of God, of the event that is harbored in the name of God, to make ourselves worthy of events, both sacred and holy. Oh my goodness, this essay is amazing. Okay, the politics of perversity. The politics of perversity is the politics of responsibility, which is why this radical theology is also radical politics. This shift from the powerless power of the event that stirs in the name of God to the responsibility we bear to respond to the event is at the same time a shift to the ethical and political order, which is the order of making ourselves worthy of the event. For the political order has for too long been organized around a teleology of power, which Deleuze himself describes as the fixed distribution of the analogy of being, the top-down hierarchical order in which all power flows from above, around a theological order of God over the world, man over woman, animal and earth. That is what we have described as the perversity of trying to forcibly contain the forces that things contain, to forcibly contain the uncontainable. The politics of sovereign power turns on what Derrida calls the unavowed theologism of the sovereignty of God. Just so, the interest we have in perverting this political order by what Deleuze calls the nomadic distribution of a crowned anarchy, and by what Derrida calls a radical democracy to come, are not best served by repudiating theology, but by rethinking theology from within, by thinking theology through to a more radical theology of the sort that we have been describing under the trope of perversity, of the perversion of an already perverted order. We will never be done with theology, and just when we think we are, theology will be more profoundly at work on us than ever before as the blind spot that is working on us from behind, as the part of our text that we do not command, bleeding into our assumptions with all the force of the unavowed. That is why it is necessary not to jettison theology and exclude it from politics, but to rethink theology and allow it have a voice in rethinking politics. Apart from and opposed to the fixed distribution of power exercised by what Kierkegaard liked to mock as Christendom, which is the power of this world, the Hebrew prophets in the New Testament propose to us power of an entirely different sort. There we find the paradoxical rule or archy of the anarchic, of the one lost sheep, not the 99, of children, not adults, of those who were not invited to the feast, of sinners, not the righteous, of the prodigal son, not the loyal one, of the lepers and ritually impure, not the pure, of the weak, not the strong, of everyone who is summed in Paul's ringing articulation of the perversity of God. And I quote from Paul, God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God, what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, things that are not, to reduce to nothing things that are. And that's 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 27 through 28. I propose a sacred anarchy that is in every case the counterpart to the crowned anarchy of Deleuze, which places the crown of divine preference upon the brow of the nomadic and the immigrant, of the outsider, the marginalized and disempowered, of the least among us, which is sharply put by Paul when he says that the weakness of God is stronger than human strength in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 25. The name of God is the name of weakness, or of a weak force, not the name of a physical or metaphysical force that can magically intervene and supervene upon the forces of nature or of history. The name of God is not well served by a powerful institution that enforces its own will under the cover of the name of God, as when the church authorizes itself by placing the words, "Thou art Peter, and upon this rock I will build my church," on the lips of Jesus. That is auto-crowning of the strong with real power and goes hand in hand with its secular counterpart, the sovereignty of the nation, to whom power is transferred in modernity. That does not reflect the sacred anarchy of Jesus, who exercised only the power of powerlessness, who embodied the weakness of God, who practiced not the sword, but the power of forgiveness and of loving his enemies, even unto death. What would a nation look like that renounced sovereignty, that flexed the muscles not of military strength but of forgiveness, that organized a foreign policy around hospitality to the dispossessed and impoverished, that opened its borders to the widow, the orphan, and the stranger, that took the food out of its own mouth and shared its wealth, that placed the crown of privilege upon what Paul called the nothings and the nobodies of this world? That is the politics of perversity called for by the event harbored in the name of God, the most perverse possible politics and the interruption of the business as usual of brutal power. To be sure, these images from the New Testament and the prophets of the Jewish scriptures are fantastic imaginative leaps. But that is ever the function of literature, to give sensible and imaginative form to the event, to let the event come into word, image, and sound. All so many ways to respond to the address issued by the event. They are indeed dreams, the dreams of the gods, God's dreams, dreaming of the messianic age, of messianic justice, and of such dreams as politics made, lest it become something less than itself. Unless there is an excess in politics, something more than politics in politics, and the name of God is the name of excess, then politics will fail to be itself. Unless it dreams of the impossible, it will be content with a compromised and brutal real politic of the possible. It is theology's function, the function of a radical theology, to dream, to pray, and to weep over the excess of the event that keep political orders open-ended and dreaming of what is coming. In conclusion, when we say that God is not above being but within, neither as a first being nor the being of beings, we stand in Hegel's debt. When we say that the name of God is the name of an event that pulsates throughout being, an inner beating that rises to excess from time to time and from place to place, we enter a space cleared by Hegel. God is everywhere as the excess that things contain, the promise that they hold, the deep deposit of the memory of the dead. The lamentations of the wretched of the earth, the cries of pain and injustice, are God's pain. This is not because God associates God's self with them in a movement of divine empathy, as happens in the various world religions, which is not to be taken lightly, as it remains one of religion's most powerful figures. Rather, and more radically, it is because bodies in pain embody the pain that expresses God's life, the excess that rises up and breaks through the tranquil surface of existence and elicits the name of God as a cry for justice, peace, and joy. As the excess of the event, God is expressed in both exultation and abjection, joy and sorrow, glory and misery. God is the name we give to events that have increased their velocity to infinity, that glow white hot in intensity to the flow of events that exceed the speed limits of a mediocre life and break through the surface in times and places of excess, of excessive joy and sorrow, beauty and horror. God is not the source of beauty or horror, like some first being or uncaused cause, but horror is a wound in the body of God that requires a redress, even as beauty is a jewel adorning the body of God that calls for our celebration. When we say that God belongs to another order, to the ordering order of events that call for response, that call and recall, that have a certain power which is not that of effective forces, we pursue a path Hegel made possible, which hears the name of God as an event occurring in matter, space, and time. What Hegel called idealism, we have redescribed, as the power of an event that calls, which is the power of powerlessness. The idea is not an effective force, but a call. Calls can go unanswered or unheeded. Calls can be declined or rejected. Calls can be refused or ignored. Calls lay claim to us, but we can always resist their claim. Calls solicit, but we can turn away the solicitor. Calls enjoin, but we can always refuse or disobey. The responsibility of the response is ours. That is what we can call materialism, which means turning the virtual event into material actuality. Idealism solicits, materialism answers. Materialism means that we are the hearers of the call, the one laid claim to, solicited, visited, invited, enjoined to materialize events, to make them happen materially, which is why Levinas says that faced with the hunger of the other, there is no bad materialism other than our own. On such a view, one might even say that in the theology of the event, there is a remarkable transmutation and perverse reversal that has so far gone unremarked, namely a perversity of prayer, for materialism is the answer to God's prayers. By this I mean that if it is God who calls, and we are the ones called upon, then it is God who solicits us, and thus prays to us and seeks our aid and succor. But insofar as we also pray, for we are woven of prayers and tears, we in turn pray for the heart, to respond, to make ourselves worthy of the event. We pray for peace, long for justice, dream of the Messianic age, call for the democracy to come, pray and weep over what is missing in the body of God. These are God's dreams, God's prayers, and ours, with the result that we and God together form a common bond and are both praying for the Messianic age, for the coming of the Messiah. Here's another parallax for Zizek. Our prayers to God are but God's prayers to us, from another point of view. But of course the Messianic age will never come, for its being is its becoming, its to come. Its being is the various intensities of becoming, the becoming of events, the events of becoming. The figure of Messianic peace and joy floats like a cloud, which Plato called ideas, Kant called ideals, and Hegel called the absolute, giving suggestive form to our imaginative life, sparking the flow of philosophical questioning, giving heart and mind to the great religious traditions, taking shape in the work of art in all its variations. The power of events is the power of appeal, and the name of God harbors events of the most excessive and provocative appeal, eliciting the most powerful invitation, summing up what is best in us, appealing to the better angels of our nature, to make ourselves worthy of what happens to us, to make ourselves worthy of the event. To say all this is to step into a place that was first opened up by Hegel. Oh my gosh, that's such a good essay. So again, I'm reading from a book called Hegel in the Infinite, edited by Zizek. That essay is from John D. Caputo, who again wrote the book The Weakness of God. He's a beautiful writer. Thank you so much for listening. I just love that essay. All right, take care.